Hello and welcome to Chapter 2, Diversity in Organizations. This chapter we're going to focus on what diversity is, how we can benefit from diversity in organizations, and how do we manage diversity effectively. So we're going to start with what discrimination is. So discrimination is just to note a difference between things. It doesn't inherently have any pejorative connotation to it. So if you take a test in class, that test is meant to discriminate. It's meant to discriminate high performers versus low performers, people who know the material versus people who don't know the material. So generally when we think of discrimination, though, we think of unfair discrimination, which is when we assume stereotypes about groups. When we don't recognize that there are individual differences, that can be harmful to organization employees. We are not all the same. So the best practice is to realize that we have these differences and to figure out how we can leverage these differences to become a more effective and efficient place to work. So we're going to start talking about biographical characteristics. So these are things that are objective and they're easily obtained from personnel records. These are also things that you can see. So we're talking about things like race and age and sex. These are things that are readily observable with your eyeballs. And oftentimes these are the variations that can be basis for discrimination. We're going to talk about the different types. Biographical characteristics are synonymous with a surface level of diversity. So these are things that are, again, readily observable. They actually cause the most amounts of discrimination, but we actually find that when you really analyze whether or not you get along with people in the workplace, you're really looking at this sort of deep level of diversity. So you're looking at things like personality and values and goals, things that have nothing to do with the color of your skin or what sex you were born or how old you are. So these are things that fundamentally do differentiate how we view the world and how we view the workplace. And these are the things that really can make you want to work with people or not want to work with people. However, again, most of discrimination is based off of these surface things that actually in the long run don't make that much of a difference. So we're going to start talking about age first. Age is a big issue because a lot of the U.S. workforce is aging. We have the baby boomers who are all going to be of retirement age at the same time. That's actually going to leave us with a large gap in our workforce. This is important because we actually don't have as many people being of the age groups, of the upcoming age groups, to actually fill these positions. So we really don't have enough butts in seats, actually. So we're very concerned about how do we keep older workers in the jobs that they're currently performing, and make them feel valuable, make them feel worthwhile in the workplace, and also sort of combat these stereotypes that we have. So we have sort of these stereotypes that older workers are not as productive as younger workers, that they're fussy, that they don't really adapt to technology well. So if we continue to have these stereotypes and we continue to make older workers feel like they are marginalized in the workplace, then why wouldn't they retire? And if we have them retire, we lose their significant amount of knowledge that they have obtained over their career, and we simply just don't have people to replace them. So I want you to watch this BMW and the Aging Workforce clip. I know some of you have questions on how to access clips. You can't access them in the narrated PowerPoint. So if you're watching this now, you can't access them. What you have to do is you have to go into Blackboard, you have to go into materials and go into the regular PowerPoints, the non-narrated PowerPoints. Pull up the PowerPoint, make sure that you're in presentation mode, which you can get to with an F5. So it should be sort of full screen. And then anything that's sort of underlined you should be able to click on it, and that should lead you to the link. So I would like you to sort of pause the lecture, go do that now, because then we're going to kind of talk a little bit about the clip. So hopefully you've paused me and you're coming back. I think the BMW clip is really excellent because they show how they were able to tackle this aging workforce problem in Germany, where actually it's more of an issue because they're aging faster than in the United States. And they were able to do it with not very much money, and they just simply kind of looked at what older workers needed and gave it to them, whether it was places to stretch or softer work floors, magnifying glasses, and they were able to reduce, absenteeism. They were able to reduce errors. They were able to reduce people wanting to leave the workforce, all with a pretty small fixes. So they did say that this isn't necessarily a panacea. It's not something that's going to solve every problem in every place. But I think it really leads us towards being more creative and looking at the small things that we can do to make older workers more productive and feel valued in the workplace. We do find that when we have older workers, we find that turnover and absenteeism rates are actually lower among older workers, which I think goes against stereotypes. You think older workers, they're more sickly, they have more health problems, but we actually find that they are not leaving the organization. They're not taking more sick days or taking more sort of unaccounted for days than any other age. And we find that age is not associated with lower productivity. So again, we need to sort of question these stereotypes that we have so that we're not running older workers out of the workplace prematurely. So if we look at differences in sex between males and females, we find that there's actually no consistent male or female differences in problem-solving ability, analytical skills, competitive drive, motivation, sociability, or learning drive. So men and women are equal in pretty much all ways as far as intelligence goes. The only thing that we might find is a small difference in spatial ability, but even when we find that relationship, the magnitude that relationship exists is pretty small. Spatial ability being the ability to sort of rotate things in 3D and be able to make sense of that. We do find it sort of does beg the question, though, if there's no male-female differences in these cognitive arenas, why are women earning less than men for the same positions, and why do they have fewer professional opportunities? So I want you to watch this clip, Fair Pay. I really only want you to watch it to 5 minutes and 55 seconds. If you choose to watch it after that, that's your own decision. Again, this is another John Oliver clip. Again, it is a little risque. There is some language, but they do a really good job looking at what is the difference in pay? Does it exist? Is it important? And they really kind of talk about that. So I want you to watch it. And I want you to think about, is this something that we need to consider? So this leads us to the activity. So you need to watch the clip before you do the activity. And I want you to answer these questions. So again, a page and a half, double spaced as part of your activity, uploaded on Blackboard. And the questions are as following. Is it important to ensure men and women earn equal pay for equal work? Is this an issue organizations should care about? Why or why not? What can an organization do to make a fair and unbiased compensation system? And what are the benefits to compensation systems that are fair and unbiased? So go ahead and answer those questions, and that will be your activity for Chapter 2. So more on biographical characteristics. So we talked about age, we talked about sex. Race and ethnicity, again, are a biographical or surface level diversity characteristic. We do generally tend to find that employees favor colleagues of their own race in performance evaluations, promotion decisions, and pay raises. I think a lot of that has to do with we're just inherently kind of narcissistic. So we like people that are like ourselves. If you look at your friends, a lot of times they are similar to you in a lot of different ways. In fact, there have even been studies where when they're trying to assess somebody's credit rating, they actually will look at their friend's credit rating because they find that your credit rating is actually usually in alignment with your friends. So we are weirdly, oddly alike to our close circle of friends and family. So I don't know that it's so much based in racism, this. I think it's just based in the fact that we kind of like people that remind us of ourselves. It's kind of an inherent human condition. We do find that African Americans and Hispanics perceive higher levels of discrimination in the workplace. This is still an issue. We still see Equal Employment Opportunity Commission claims about discrimination, especially for African American and Hispanics. And we do find that African Americans generally fare worse than whites in all employment decisions, whether that's selection or promotion or training opportunities. So clearly we are still disadvantaging somebody based on something that really doesn't matter. These surface level biographical characteristics really don't determine whether or not you're a good employee. So we shouldn't make work decisions based on those. And I will tell you time and time again in class is that You really want the top talent, really. You want people who do the job to the best of their ability. And that can come from anybody, regardless of race or age or gender or disability. So we shouldn't sort of prematurely have these stereotypes and base our selection decisions or our promotion decisions on these things that don't matter. So now we're going to talk about disability. So the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission classifies somebody as disabled who has any physical or mental impairment that can substantially limit one or more major life activities. And if you're wondering what those major life activities include, these are things like caring for yourself, performing manual tasks, seeing, hearing, eating, sleeping, walking, standing, lifting, bending, speaking, breathing, learning, reading, concentrating, thinking, communicating, and working. And this is not even an exhaustive list, but it just gives you an idea of if you can't do some of these things, then you might be classified as being disabled under the Americans for Disability Act. We generally tend to find that workers with disability receive higher performance evaluations, but we wonder if sometimes that's because managers might have lower performance expectations. Like, okay, this person is deaf, so I'm not going to assume that they're going to do their job very well, and then I'm sort of pleasantly surprised when I don't find that they have these performance limitations, and that might account for their higher performance evaluations. We want to, again, top talent can come from people with disabilities, so we don't want to have these sort of preconceived ideas that they are limited in what they can do in their job. I do want to talk a little bit about mental illness. The thing about mental illness in the workplace is it's really prevalent. There's a lot of people out there that have anxiety and depression issues. However, unlike a physical disability that people feel at least a little bit more comfortable talking about and disclosing and having protection for, if you have a mental illness, a lot of times you still feel like you don't want to self-disclose. You feel like you might be shamed or punished for that. Bosses don't know how to deal with people with mental illness as well as they know how to have sort of reasonable accommodation for people with physical impairments. But I do think that this is something we can become much stronger in. Again, this affects a large percentage of our workforce. And if we ignore it, if we push people under the rug and make their jobs harder because they can't get the help they need, because they don't want to talk about it. And if they do talk about it, they're punished or people don't know how to handle them. That's a substantial issue that we care about. So I do just want to show you sort of a chart of how common mental illness is in adults. This is from the National Institute of Mental Health, so from a very reputable source. And if we look at this, we can see that overall, we have just under 20% of people reporting that they have some sort of mental illness. It's a little bit stronger in females. We find that 26 to 49-year-olds report the most levels of it. And we generally tend to find that certain races seem to be a little bit more prone to having some of these kind of mental illnesses. But this chart actually underrepresents mental illnesses because it does actually not include some things in this chart. But if 20% of our workforce is suffering from mental illness at any given time, that's a pretty substantial issue that we should have some idea on how to provide resources for and how to support this population. Other biographical characteristics, one is tenure. Tenure is that thing that doesn't seem to fit in with everything else that we've talked about. You know, race and sex and age all seem like they go together. Tenure is really just how long you've been in the job. We do generally tend to find that tenure is a good predictor of employee productivity, unlike the other biographical characteristics that we've talked about. And we do tend to find that tenure and job satisfaction, so being happy at your job, liking your job, are positively related. So the longer you're at your job, the more you like your job, which makes a good amount of sense, right? Because if you hate your job, why wouldn't you leave it? That's not to say some people are not trapped into jobs because they don't have other opportunities. They're sort of stuck in a location. So some people could hate their job and still be at it a very long time. But in general, we generally tend to find that people who stay at their job longer amounts of time are more satisfied. Religion is another biographical characteristic. U.S. law prohibits discrimination based on religion, but it's still a very substantial issue, especially for Muslims. We have found that, especially since 9/11, more Muslims have reported discrimination based on their religious faith. And that's something that we, again, want to make sure that we are not judging people based on anything but productivity. The only thing you should care about in the workplace is, does this person do their job? Do they do it well? The last thing that we'll talk about biographical characteristics is sexual orientation and gender identity. They are different. So sexual orientation is who you are attracted to. Are you a man that likes women? Are you a woman that likes women? Are you a man who likes man? That kind of thing. Gender identity is how you feel you are inside. So do you identify as being female? Do you identify as being a male? That actually has very little to do with who you find sexually attractive. So they're two separate kinds of things. We do find that federal law does not protect employees against discrimination based on sexual orientation, but we find that this may change soon. I think with younger generations, we see more acceptance for different sexual orientations, different gender identities than we've seen from older populations. But, you know, the political tide may change. We may see this get more protection. We may see it get less protection. It'll be something very interesting to pay attention to. We do find to sort of combat this, and this is how sort of public policy issues like fair pay do really affect organizations. They can become organizational issues. To combat same-sex couples not having protections, not having, you know, rights, not having the ability to be on each other's insurances. We find that most Fortune 500 companies actually have policies covering sexual orientation, and now about half of them actually have policies on gender identity as well. This becomes really important because you might have people who have a different gender identity. So somebody who was born as a male but feels like inside they're a female, be treated in kind of horrific ways in the workplace. There was a man born biologically male who identified as female and was going through a transition, worked at a company where they didn't know what to do with her, right? So they made her go use a bathroom on a floor that was under construction. There were live wires. She was afraid for her safety. So it does have impacts on the kind of decisions that organizations make. So it's something that we have to think about. So now we're going to move in away from sort of these characteristics, these biographical characteristics, into other things that we differ on. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is ability. So this is a person's current capacity to perform various tasks in a job. What I do find interesting here is that you can change how well somebody does their job just by activating stereotypes. So if I was to give a lecture and I was a math professor and I had both males and females in my class, and I was about to hand out a test, and I said, okay, females who are out there, we all know you're not very good at math, so just do your best. I know you won't do it very well. You're meant to do other things like make me a sandwich. If this is the kind of thing that I talk about before a test, I can actually make females do worse on a math test, regardless of what their ability is. So I want to show you this clip on stereotype threat. It's actually based on research done out of Stanford where they show you how it works. And I think it's very interesting the ways that we can manipulate even core task performance based on how you think people are perceiving you.
Social psychologists have found that performance in any given
I'm turning up the volume. Okay, let's try this now.
Social psychologists have found that performance in any given situation may be influenced by the threat of being negatively stereotyped. Stereotype threat is disruptive and intimidating. The fear is that when facing a negative stereotype, One's performance will confirm that the stereotype is true. The anxiety that the stereotype fosters prevents people from doing their best.
As soon as you're aware that you could be seen through the lens of a negative stereotype about a group that you're a part of, if you care about that situation, you could feel some sense of threat, that you're going to be treated in terms of that stereotype or perceived in terms of that stereotype, or in some way reduced to that stereotype. And it's a kind of threat that, as you can tell from that, happens to everybody, because everybody's a member of some group that is negatively stereotyped. All groups have negative stereotypes.
In an interesting experiment conducted by Dr. Jeff Stone, black and white athletes were instructed that they were going to be tested on a golf-related task.
When I finish the instructions today, you'll be going into the adjoining room where you'll be given a standardized measure of athletic aptitude developed by sports psychologists and based on the game of golf. The test is designed to measure personal factors correlated with natural athletic ability, such as hand-eye coordination. Any questions about that?
When a group was told the task was a test of athletic ability, the African American subjects did better than the white subjects.
When I finish the instructions today, you'll be going into the adjoining room where you'll be given a standardized measure of athletic aptitude developed by sports psychologists and based on the game of golf. The test is designed to measure personal factors correlated with ability to think strategically during an athletic performance test. Any questions about that?
When told the task was a test of sports strategy, the white subjects outperformed the African American subjects. In both cases, stereotypes triggered beliefs and fears in the participants that became self-fulfilling.
The cute thing of the study is that he reverses the effect by, in a different condition, changing the label for the condition. In this condition, he says to them, this is a test of sports strategic intelligence. So there's a stereotype that now is more likely to intimidate the African American subjects in this experiment, and indeed the performance reverses. Under that instruction, whites outperform blacks. So yes, I think this kind of intimidation, I think stereotype threat is a cousin to a much more general kind of reputational intimidation that we can impose on people. And is imposed on us as a kind of regular feature of social existence.
We actually find that even positive stereotypes can be something that's not beneficial. So, stereotypes like Asians are good at math. I've actually had students who are like, I'm Asian and I'm not good at math, and it makes me feel embarrassed. It makes me feel frustrated, that I'm not living up to the stereotype. So regardless if the stereotype is good or bad, we find that the stereotype threat is actually really prevalent and has some pretty interesting and pretty significant relevance on how you perform your job. We do find that there's two types of abilities. We'll talk more about intellectual abilities, but we'll talk a little bit about physical abilities as well. So intellectual abilities are your abilities that you need to perform mental activities, so thinking, reasoning, problem solving. And I always like to start out by asking people, what do they think is more important, intelligence or motivation? So the answer is usually both, but the question is it 50-50? Is it 60-40? How do you split this? What is more important? The interesting thing is there's not necessarily a right or wrong answer to this question, but intelligence will set your capacity. So I like to think about this as two cups, right? So let's say you have one glass, one cup that's taller, that's bigger, has more the ability to hold more volume than the other. So I would say that this is indicative of somebody who's more intelligent. Their cup is just bigger. They can actually have just more volume in it at one time. However, motivation is how much are these glasses each filled, right? I could have a bigger glass that's not filled very tall at all, right? And a smaller glass that is actually filled to the top. And that's motivation. Like, how much are you using that capacity to do what you need to do? I guess I tend to skew towards wanting more intelligent people because, again, they do have more capacity. But there are people who are very intelligent who have no motivation to utilize that, right? So, can you coach them? Can you help them, use that capacity, that ability to do their job sometimes, but sometimes not. So it is a case where both intelligence and motivation are important, but sometimes you have people that are working at their full capacity and I can't get them any higher. It's just capped on what they have. And that's what sort of intelligence kind of does. If you're wondering, and here's an interesting fact, if you were going to have just one piece of information and you were going to utilize it to make selection decisions, so who you're going to hire into a workplace, intelligence is the best predictor. So if I just have your IQ, I can pretty reasonably tell how good of an employee you are. That's not saying I can't get highly intelligent people who are just not motivated, because that happens. But again, if you have just one piece of information, intelligence tests are the best thing that you can do. They give you the most amount of information. So the next question will be, well, why don't we use intelligence tests? Well, I then like to ask people, do you like to take intelligence tests? Would you want to take an intelligence test to get a job? And a lot of people say no. They don't see how that's related to their job. They don't, which we call sort of face validity. There's no way to say like, oh, hey, if I know how fast a train is traveling from Chicago and how fast a train is traveling from New York, I'll know when they meet. What does that have to do with, being a good nurse? But at the sort of abstract level, the more intelligent you are, the more cognitive ability you have, the quicker you can process information, the quicker you learn things. It really is a factor that helps you do your job better. So as far as what intelligence tests we use, there's a whole lot, and there are problems with each and every one of them. So there was a big push for intelligence tests becoming culturally fair, culturally unbiased, because they were finding that just how questions were phrased, sometimes biased against certain cultures or certain, sexes. If I ask you a math question and I put it in terms of baseball, so somebody's at, the first base, home base, and they run to the first base and second base, how much of an angle are they at? That seems like a math question, but I'm putting it in a sports analogy. So if you're from a culture that doesn't have baseball, that's really hard to visualize. It puts you in a bit of a disadvantage. Baseball is probably a sport that's a little bit more popular with men than women, so you're disadvantaging women. Even how you put a language, you might be from a culture that you don't read left from right, you read right to left. So there's a lot of things that we have to take into account when we're trying to make a test that's tapping into what it's supposed to tap into, which is how intelligent you are. Not how familiar with basketball are you, or baseball, or cooking, or whatever kind of analogy that I'm using to try and test your knowledge. So the most common test that we find in the workplace is the Wonderlic intelligence test. I have a clip here. I think it's kind of relevant. If you follow football or you're excited at all about the Super Bowl, this might be something that you're into. So the NFL does use the Wonderlic intelligence test, and they talk about, is this information that they think is important? Do you want a smart quarterback? Do you want, people on your team that are smart, as well as being, physically gifted? So watch this, and, think about that. Think about if that's something that you would want to know about if you were a coach, if you were an owner. We talked about problems with intelligence testing. Probably the most culturally fair test that we have right now is called the Raven's Progressive Indices, and it's all patterns. There are no words. There's no lead-ins. There's no scenario. They're simply patterns, and you have to predict the next pattern that will come out of what they give you. So that seems to be pretty good. It's used pretty often, not as often as the Wonderlic, but we might be moving towards these tests that again are less verbal. They're less, they have less words in them. That seems to help us get a better reading on somebody's intelligence and not have it be, interference from these other things. General mental ability is the overall factor of intelligence. And then under this, we have sort of specific intellectual ability dimensions. So that would be like sort of mathematics, verbal, spatial. But those things generally correlate into this overall construct that we call general mental ability. which is intelligence, cognitive ability. We'll use those words kind of interchangeably. So physical abilities, if we're talking about the NFL, I could have the smartest person out there, but if they don't have any physical abilities, they're not going to be able to do the job, right? So we want somebody who has the capacity to do tasks that are stamina, dexterity, strength, and similar characteristics. We generally tend that there are 9 basic abilities, and their strength, flexibility, and other factors. I do have a clip here if you want to see what a physical abilities test looks like. And again, I think this is for correctional officers. I've also seen it for police officers. Any job that requires you to have this set of physical abilities might need to have a physical ability test to go along with it. So diversity is a great thing. It can actually lead to higher revenue. It can lead to more creativity. It can lead to better decisions. And it really does a lot for an organization. Statistically, mathematically, science backs this. This is not something that is my opinion. However, it does come with problems. We generally tend to find that the more diversity there is, the more conflict can arise. So if you have 50 people in a room and these 50 people each have a different idea on how something can get done, you could see how that might cause some conflict, right? It also can be incredibly time consuming because you have to hear everybody out. You have to sort of process what are good ideas, what are not so good ideas. How can we take these ideas and tweak them or combine them? That is something that is not, quickly done. You can see that if you were in a room with your friends that were very much like you and you all saw things the same way, you could make a decision that's pretty quick, right? However, you wouldn't get these dissenting outside viewpoints, and that might lead you to a decision that is not optimal because you haven't thought everything through. We generally tend to find that, it's not just about having diversity. It's not just about checking the boxes and saying, hey, we have females, or hey, we have Hispanics, or hey, we have disabled people. It's about having people that do the job to the best of their ability, who are top performers, which come from all walks of life. And then we have to figure out, how do we manage this diversity? How do we make this diversity work for us? We generally tend to find that diversity is more successful when it's everybody's business. So the whole university or the whole organization cares about diversity. If people don't care about diversity, if it's one person's pet project, you are not going to see the benefits that diversity can really add to your company. Top talent can come from anywhere. And if you are top talent, you might actually look for places that have good diversity policies. If I'm a woman and I work in a field that is underrepresented by women, let's say I'm an engineer or I'm a mathematics professor, I would want to go somewhere that had a good diversity policy, right? So I'm going to take my top talent and I'm going to go to some place that has those policies in place. So people want to work for these sort of top places to work for. And one of the things that they look for when they rank people for top places to work for are these sort of diversity policies. If you wanted to look at what the best workplaces for diversity is, Forbes does lists, other people do lists, so you can kind of see what are the best workplaces for diversity, and they even break it down for, if you're Black, where are the best places to work? If you're Hispanic, what are the best places to work? If you're Asian, what are the best places to work? So again, we're losing out on these top talent if they choose to go work for another organization because we don't have anything in place where people would feel like maybe if they came to work for our organization, they wouldn't be valued. So how do we manage diversity? Really, it's about attracting, selecting, developing, and retaining diverse employees. Really, I will tell you that most of it should be done in your recruitment process. If you work for an organization that has a diversity problem, you don't have women, you don't have Hispanics, you don't have Blacks, you don't have, whatever group that you are trying to target to bring into your organization, go to universities that have high, populations of these protected classes. If you want women, go, and you're an engineer firm, go to, American Women Engineers, Association. Go to these, special organizations, these clubs, recruit from there. I will never tell you that you need to hire somebody who's not qualified, but high performance comes from all areas, all diversities, and you should be making sure that you are recruiting effectively and efficiently to make sure that you are reaching everybody so that you have the best populations of workers possible. We want to also ensure that our hiring is bias-free. I could recruit my heart out and bring in, tons of diverse workers to apply for a position, but if I'm selecting you based on something that is not performance related and it has bias in there, then I'm not going to be selecting the right candidates. And then once people are in an organization, we want to have a positive diversity climate. We want people to understand diversity. We want people to understand what diversity can do for us. We want people to understand that diversity is important, but we also want to people understand that this is not without problems. How do we handle these problems? How do we figure out the best way to make sure that diversity is working for us?